Welcome to Modern Marketing Messages, the leading podcast discussing the latest and greatest in both online and offline marketing tactics, strategies, and trends. I'm your host, Taylor Karg, marketing content writer at AmericanEagle.com. Today we're going to talk about website redesign. Websites are meant to be fluid. As technology and business processes continue to evolve, your website should evolve along with it. If it doesn't, it may actually be hurting your business. This brings us right into today's topic, as well as begs the question, how do you know it's time for a website redesign? And to answer that question, I have here with me Mike Goliber, Vice President of Client Engagement at AmericanEagle.com. Mike, thanks for being here today and talking to us about it. Do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit, kind of your experience in the industry, how long you've worked at AmericanEagle.com, and everything that you do here for us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have been in the website redesign technology digital space for the last 16, 17 years now. I originally started back in grad school with a human factors degree, so I started as a user experience professional.
I was going to say, what does that even mean?
Well, human factors at the time was a little bit more engineering based, so it was more about sort of how to design systems for people that fit people, both from a physical ergonomic perspective, but then also from a cognitive perspective in terms of what people are expecting, what their motivations are, and being able to design systems to meet that. One of the great examples that I usually use is a cockpit in a fighter jet or even in an airplane. There's buttons and knobs and switches everywhere, and especially in a fighter cockpit scenario, if those buttons are too far away, you're in trouble. Yeah. So, being able to make sure that all those things are in the right spot and that cognitively I know where to look for certain things. So I did that for quite a long time, many years in the consulting industry as well. And then over time, I started getting more into project management and more business side. And so probably for the last almost 7-8 years or so, I've been focused on helping my clients across numerous different industries figure out how to sort of apply those same principles to how to make their sites better, how to make their experiences with their users and their customers better. And so that's a big part of what I do today. And so part of that is a sales perspective and helping new clients come on board so that we can help work together and be partners with them. But it also means existing clients and sort of looking more towards the future and understanding kind of where we need to get to together to help their business grow.
And how long have you been at AmericanEagle.com?
So I've been at American Eagle a little bit over a year now. So like a year and a quarter.
Pretty fresh.
Yeah, pretty new. Yeah, it's been great.
If I remember correctly, were you one of our clients at some point, or you had worked with a company that was a client?
I have worked with a couple of different of our clients with my previous organization. So
that's funny how that happens. There's quite a few people that have known about our company for a long time and eventually come here.
And the best part is I've driven past here for years and seen it every day for many, many years.
So just going right into today's topic, I think we need to start off with just letting people know kind of what exactly we're talking about when we talk about website redesign. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to redesign your website?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ways that I equate it is, for some reason, I always go back to building a house or having a house, right? Because there's foundational stuff and decorations and things like that. But if you think about sort of maintaining your house, right, it needs a new paint job every so often. It needs cleaning. It needs all sorts of different things. A website's no different in that respect, in that it needs to be properly monitored and maintained. And if you let the siding on your house sit for 10 years, it's going to start to degrade, and A, it's going to look bad, but B, it's going to start letting water in, things like that. And from a website perspective, it's very similar in that if you're not kind of keeping on top of it and making sure that it's operating properly, you're going to lose things like leads, you're going to lose conversions, you're going to lose all sorts of different experiences that your potential customers could have with your site. And that could range anything from, can't find the latest article that you guys posted, whatever that might be, to not being able to buy that widget or whatever that is that you're trying to sell. And so a big part of that is, the analytics side of it and keeping track of who's using what and where they're going and how they convert. And we can talk about that all day, but The redesign aspect of it really, there's two ways to think about it. One is a window dressing kind of way, right? So it doesn't look good anymore, right?
Yeah.
After 5-10 years, whatever.
Which I was going to say, I feel like a lot of people who aren't, extremely knowledgeable in the web design and development space, when they think of a website redesign, they probably think of, just changing the graphics or like changing out the color.
Yeah.
And it's, as you get more into it, you're like, hey, it's so much more than just the colors. And yeah, the colors and the graphics do play a part in it, but it's so much more than that.
Right. And it could be as simple as, every couple of years, especially if you go through a branding change, right? Or if your business acquires a new entity, right, and you merge with someone else, or you add a new suite of products or something like that, you may want to go through and kind of update just the colors and the graphics and things like that.
Yeah.
And that's something that you probably should do, right? Especially if you're trying to reposition yourself as a business. But it's also, potentially a lot more than that. So it can get down into, redesign is such a kind of a loaded term, because it can get into things like replatforming and using different systems and things like that.
Yeah.
And it really just depends on, from a business perspective, what your goals are, but then also, what your customers are really needing. And finding that balance, right? Sometimes, the underlying systems that you use to publish content or, display different messaging or hook into social media aspects, sometimes that underlying system has either stagnated or it just wasn't ever properly used to the best of its ability. And so you need to take a deeper look at, going back to the house example, like how is your foundation, right? Is it starting to crack? Do you need to fix that first?
And I feel like one question that a lot of people would have is, and it's a very hard question to answer when we're talking about this topic, because it's like, okay, so what is even the purpose of doing a website redesign? But it's like you said, it's just a case-by-case basis, and there could be so many underlying issues of how to even go about kicking off that process.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've had numerous clients come and say, our system doesn't work and we can't publish content quickly and it's hard. Sometimes they're absolutely right. And sometimes they're absolutely not. Sometimes it's, hey, the last person that, installed your CMS and built it out for you didn't do it properly. And there's a couple of fixes we can make and you can now publish content on the fly. Sometimes there is underlying issues and problems, or even more likely is, that system that you bought 5-10 years ago that you wanted to use now is very outdated. It doesn't work anymore. And so there's a much larger effort, kind of underlying effort, to get you back onto a platform that can help you do all the things that you want to do from a marketing and a business perspective.
Yeah. And so one of the questions, because we are modern marketing messages, in your experience, how does the average marketer know? Let's not get into the nitty gritty of how like a designer, a developer, or a front-end developer would know, but how does myself as the average marketer, how would I know looking at our website, and how do I figure that out?
Right. One of them is, one answer to that is time, right? So if it's been 5 years or longer since you've done anything with your site, it's probably time to at least take a look at it and figure out what can you do to improve. The other is, competitive assessment, right? So look at who do you compete with? What are they doing? Are they doing things that you want to be doing? Are they, and it's less about design. It's more about that sort of customer experience and that user flow through the system, through, getting to whatever your end goal is, whether that's, selling curtain rods or, selling marketing capabilities or whatever product it is that you're offering. So doing that competitive assessment is really important. But the other thing to keep in mind is it's not just your direct competitors. It's all of the entirety of the internet, right?
Yeah.
So it's, people love going to Apple. People love going to Airbnb. Uber, for example, is one of the best examples of user experience and design ever, because it's almost kind of idiot proof, right? Like I need a car, I click a button, car comes, I get in it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
So all of those things, those are, that's truly customer expectation today, regardless of what you're selling and what you're doing. So you need to be on par with at least that, right? And being able to provide that sort of experience, that sort of wow moment where someone goes, wow, this was easy. If you can get to that point, you're going to do just fine, right? And then there's levers and different things that you can do from an analytics perspective and kind of tweaking how people move through your system, whether that's navigation, whether that's, calls to action, So really just taking a hard look at your site and even pulling it up next to a bunch of other sites.
Yeah.
And saying, does this feel good enough to represent my brand, represent what we're trying to market? If the answer is no to that, then you need some help, right? And sometimes it is as simple as let's do a refresh, right? And new imagery, new wording, new color schemes, that kind of thing, kind of a rebranding. Sometimes it's a lot harder than that, and you got to dig down and talk about foundations and things like that.
Yeah. So are there any other things that you can think of right now, like off the cuff, of why people would need to do a redesign? We talked a lot about, the user experience, just comparing yourself to other brands. If you're having foundational issues, or maybe we should just get more into the foundational issues. Can we talk about some of the most popular, foundational issues you see?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the quick answers to the first part of your question is really looking at, if you have analytics on your site.
Which you should.
If
right?
you don't, you should, because that gives you really good insight into where people are dropping off, where people stop.
But what kind of analytics do you think people should be paying attention to?
Well, it really comes down to what you're selling, right? So if you are a, sort of people-to-people business and it's more of a, I don't want to say consulting, but, it's a support business, services business, you're really looking at lead generation at the top end of the funnel, right? And then you're looking at overtime conversions, right?
Yeah.
And so what does that conversion mean to your business? Sometimes it's a phone call, sometimes it's a contact, sometimes it's, filling out a form and, essentially signing a contract on the site. If your business is more product-based or, commerce-based, then obviously conversion is someone bought something, right? So, but using analytics to look at those things and seeing over time, have sales gone down? Have they gone up? What products have gone up? What have gone down? And why? And you can kind of glean that stuff out of analytics to understand maybe there is some other issue there that you don't know about, right? Because you're not sitting there all day watching analytics. Some people do, but but as long as you're keeping an eye on it, you can start to see trends over time, right? You'll see, depending on what you're selling, you'll see big spike during the Super Bowl. Okay, well, let's be prepared for that, and let's make sure we're optimized for that. Typically, commerce side, especially in the holiday season towards the end of the year, that will ramp up a lot. So is it ramping up as high as it did last year? If it's not, why?
Yeah.
So that's just kind of the first part of the answer. And sometimes it's, to get to the second part of your question is
foundational.
Yep. Some of those things that you'll see through analytics can't be fixed with design, right? It's something underlying. You're not able to properly market your products. You're not able to properly integrate with social media channels or other marketing platforms to help you run your business successfully online. So that is where we would, at AmericanEagle.com, we would really kind of dig a little deeper and say, okay, is this the right platform for you? Is it the right foundation? Can we fix that platform, or do we need a refresh? One of the other things that I've seen numerous times, is especially in the marketing side of the house, is, new CMO will come on board. They will have a specific product or a specific vendor that they really like from before. And, you could be on product. I'm not going to go products here, but you could be on product X and new CMO comes on board and says, nope, we're going to product Y. And as long as it matches and fits the, business objectives and goals, no problem. Right. But then it's, you're still doing a heavy lift at that point.
Yeah.
So.
And I think a lot in my experience in writing about a lot of case studies on different projects, I think a lot of people too, when it comes to redesign or like a replatform and the foundational issues, is their CMS. I can't even tell you how many case studies I've written about projects where people, like the marketers, have no clue why their CMS is not working the way they want it to. They can't connect content. They can't even easily upload and edit content too. And I think that's a huge part of why people would need to go under a redesign. Yeah.
No, that's 100% right. And that gets back down to how deep does the problem go, right? Almost all of the modern CMSs can do all of those things that you just talked about, right? Like quickly edit content, quickly publish content. They all have, slightly different ways of doing it, but all of it can be done. If it's not implemented properly the first time first time it's implemented, you can run into problems like that where it just doesn't seem like from a marketer's perspective, it doesn't seem like it's working right. And it could be a very easy fix. It could be literally a checkbox in an admin somewhere where you uncheck that box and now I can, this is great. I can publish it easily.
I was going to say, like, how do you know if it was implemented or not correctly or not? Like, I would assume, by getting down to the nitty gritty, you can tell by the coding or the box. But do you find that's the case frequently? Is that just there's a few minor things that need to be checked or updated and then they're like, oh, wow, this is so much easier?
Yeah, I wouldn't say frequently by any means, but it does happen.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it happens when you are going about a new CMS implementation and you tend to be more cognizant of cost than actual platform implementation, right?
Yeah.
And that's the long way of saying you get cheap about it, right? Like WordPress is a great example, right? Essentially, the base version of WordPress free.
Yeah.
But if you don't install it correctly, if you don't hook it up the right way, and I'm not a developer, which is why I say things like hook it up the right way.
That's not the lingo they use?
Maybe. I don't know. It's not that's not my world. But if it's not implemented properly, you can run into problems. I would say not frequently does that happen because typically most, in this case, it's really, you need an agency or some sort of group or your internal, development team to be able to do that properly. As a traditional general marketer, you're probably not going to know one way or the other whether it's actually done right or not.
Yeah.
You're relying on either your team or an agency or something like that to do that work for you. But, you will know when it's not working the way you want it to. And, I'm not able to accomplish my goals in a given day because of the limitations, right?
Yeah.
And the key there is finding the right group of people to come in and help you and find what are those limitations. Is it and so it goes back to the foundational part. Is it a limitation of the system? Is it a limitation of your knowledge of that system? Which that does happen, right?
Yeah.
You're not trained enough on a specific system, especially when you get into some of the larger CMS platforms. They're more complicated, right?
They have a ton of different capabilities.
Yep. And there's, numerous certifications that people can get to figure out how to use it the most effective way.
How to check that box that none of us can find.
That's right, exactly. So that tends to happen more often than, it wasn't built properly.
Yeah.
But both happen.
So where does A/B testing fit in all of this? Do you suggest that to clients, as they're going through this process?
100% every time. Yeah. When you think about doing a straight redesign, right? I'm going to redesign the flows. I'm going to redesign, the way those pages are structured, how to get to things. Amazon, for instance, has been doing incredible amounts of A/B testing for their entire existence.
Yeah.
And for them, it matters, 1/100% change one way or the other is multi-millions of dollars, right? But if you can, the simple example is, changing the add to cart, instead of add to cart, it's add to bag, right? Like simple things like that. You can run these A/B tests, and within a week, 2 weeks, depending on however long you want to look at it, you will find very quickly which one works better. The more that you can invest in A/B testing, the better.
Is
typically.
it an expensive kind of thing? Is that relatively inexpensive compared to, everything else in the process of a redesign?
I hate to use this phrase again, but it depends.
Yeah. This whole thing, all of this is very on a case-by-case basis.
Yep,
so.
Totally. If you're running thousands of A/B tests, it gets expensive, right? Because you've got a lot of people looking at this, and you've got development teams making shifts and changing pages on any given day. But you can very easily do simple A/B testing. There's also multivariate testing, all sorts of other different methods that you can use. But simple A/B tests just in terms of, if you're struggling to figure out what tagline is working, right? You run it for a week and see what kind of flow through that space of the website you get. Change it the next week and see what kind of flow you get there. The one caution there is that, if you only look at it for 2 days and then you compare it to something else for 2 days, your sample size probably isn't large enough to really see which one's working.
Yeah, to make the most efficient decision.
So you really do have to kind of think about duration and what's meaningful data to you. And that's why I would say yes to A/B testing, but also, having someone on your team that's more, I was going to say like a data scientist, but I don't think you have to go that far, but someone who is just well in tuned with both the analytics and the testing results and figuring out and kind of, moving those levers in a way that can help gain business. I will say one more thing though, the A/B testing part really does come after the redesign part.
Yeah.
You can think about A/B testing while you're doing a redesign and thinking about, especially if internally you're struggling to figure out, where to put certain things. But really that user experience professional and design professional that you have up front needs to be able to answer 80-90% of those questions, right? And then you have the 10 to 20% at the end that you're on the fence about, or you have a CEO that says, oh no, I want this here, and you're like, I don't know if that's the right idea. But that's when you get into A/B testing, and literally 99% of the world, when you put data in front of them and say this one won and this one didn't, and it's a wide margin,
it's going to make
99% of the time they're going to go, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing that I really wanted to talk about, and I think that this entire topic is very like semantics based, because it's so what is, a redesign versus a rebuild, and then we were throwing around the replatform, refresh. What does all this mean?
Right.
Like, what is a rebuild versus a redesign?
So a rebuild really is talking about that foundation platform that we were talking about. So that really is starting from the ground up.
Okay.
And redesign, refresh is a little bit more on the front end, the look, essentially. And it's easy enough to kind of mix all of them together, but at the end of the day, it's what are you trying to change and why, and then how are you going to change it? So and that's what we were kind of a little bit talking about before of, I've had clients come and say, well, I need an entire new system. And the answer is, well, you don't actually need a new system. Your system's great. You just need a redesign. You just need a better front end layer to that. It's like someone, again, back to the house, who says, oh, I hate my house. I need a new house. And I actually went through this a couple of years ago where it's like, oh, our kitchen stinks. I hate this thing. Redid the kitchen, right? Instead of selling the house and moving into a brand new house. So it's small incremental things that you can do to make it feel right.
Yeah.
What I think is much harder to say is what feels right?
Yeah.
And that really depends on, both from an aesthetic perspective in terms of what the design looks like, but then also back to those, customer journeys, user flows, all the paths through the system. Like, does that feel right for your customers? And I think that's the thing that gets lost in, sort of the redesign conversation is, if you go through a complete branding change with your business, sure, yep, you got to do redesign. At the very least, you got to put new logos up, right? Or whatever it is. But really, at the end of the day, it comes down to your customers, your users, the people that are interacting with your brand. If they are happy and they're doing great, how can you make them happier, and how can they do even greater? If they are not happy with your brand, they are not happy with the experience, how can you fix that? So all of those things are moving the needle towards the ideal experience, because the ideal experience for your customers always 100% of the time yields you more money, more leads, more growth, whatever that is for your business.
So is a redesign just a lot more customer focused? Like, it's like you just said, it's kind of just, you need to keep the customer in mind throughout this entire process. And it's all about what exactly does the customer want from us. So another one of the questions I had was just, going through the redesign process, how long does that typically take? And I know that's a little bit of a loaded question, as each customer and each need base is a lot different, but I think there's some, generalities that we could talk about with that.
Yeah, for sure. It does, of course, it depends, but the biggest part that depends is
the theme of our podcast today. Right. It depends.
It's semantic and it depends. Yeah. It depends on, the scale of the site that you're redesigning. A single, a few page marketing brochure style site, very quick, all in a couple months, something like that. If you have significant e-commerce capabilities and lots of functionality and things like that, it will definitely take longer. And the reason for that is obviously there's more stuff, but there's also more upfront thinking that needs to happen. So, conducting a redesign exercise isn't, oh, I don't like it, so I'm going to make it look better, right? And it goes back to your comments about, customer experience and putting the customer first. What we typically do is we'll do essentially what's a discovery phase. Okay. And that is kind of assessing everything. And it's a lot of what we've talked about already, but it's assessing the look, the feel, the flows, the journey maps, let's say user journeys to make it kind of holistic.
Yeah.
And we will also look at the underlying system and the platform and the foundation that we're talking about to sort of get an assessment of where are you at, and then in parallel to that is understanding your business objectives, your goals, your desires, what are your 3-5 year plans for the business? How are you trying to scale that business up, or are you trying to maintain? Are you trying to catch up to competitors? Are you trying to squash competitors? Kind of all of those different things all come together, which then lead us into a roadmap essentially of how we're going to get there. And that really comes through the typical process of user experience work, which is wireframing and sort of mapping out the information architecture of the site, so where your navigation is, what are all the components there, and doing all of this through a lens of the customer, right? And typically there'll be multiple types of customers that you want to account for in that process, right? So those are what we call personas, usually have a lot of different names, but you want to make sure that all of that is accounted for when you're doing the design work up front. We're doing that also in parallel with the development team. So especially over the last 3 to 5 years, everyone's been talking about agile.
Yeah, that is definitely a massive buzzword
It
right
is. But what's even better now is sort of creating these design systems. So you're kind of designing, you're thinking about it holistically, but then you're designing individual components out with your development team at the same time. So you're working in those agile sprints, but you're doing it together. The old days, the waterfall days, was I created this beautiful design and you throw it over the wall and say, go build this thing. It's going to be great. And they go, I don't know what this is.
Yeah, read all of my handwritten notes and build this website based off of them.
And they say, well, I can't do these 15 things because we didn't talk about it. So those days are gone. But there's a really nice way of being able to sort of tweak and improve the experience as we go through. Because, all the developers I've ever worked with have really great ideas too from a user experience perspective, because everyone can put on their user experience hat, right?
Yeah.
And put themselves in the shoes of those personas or of those customers that are going to be using that site. Kind of circle back to your question, that process, that's the one that it depends, right? It depends on how much stuff there is to build, design, and how long that can take. Depending on the size, we typically kind of, all in for a very large site with lots of functionality and e-commerce capabilities, all that stuff is a year-ish.
Yeah.
Typically. But we've done numerous things where you can speed that up quite a bit to get, minimally viable product out the door for a certain event, right? Because we could start a project in, let's say, June, and we need something out by October because Christmas is coming. Right. Yeah. So there's ways around that, and you kind of phase out some of those executables, right? So that you get something out by October, November for the holiday season, and then you do here's another one of those rewords, a refresh or an update to the thing that you've already done, so that you can continue to sort of meet all the requirements over time. So, and then from a dollar and cents perspective, that's the one I there's no way I could tell you that.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it just, like you said,
really
it varies
does.
just depending on the needs of the project.
And it will depend very much on who you hire or who you have internally to build it. And to design it and to build it. Yeah. There are some agencies out there that'll do it basically almost for free because they need the portfolio and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then there's, the big 4 agencies where it's hundreds of dollars an hour, and multiply that over a year. Yeah, there's your number.
Quite a big chunk of change.
It's a big chunk of change. Yeah.
So we kind of touched upon that in your entire answer right there, but who is typically involved in the process? So there's obviously developers, but kind of who else is in this process?
Yeah, so there's always project manager, right? To kind of oversee everything and make sure everything's functioning and operating and moving forward and meeting our deliverables and deadlines and milestones. And
are they the ones that are like most in communication with the customer? They kind of are the liaison between the two sides.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So they're the ones that are really keeping, the customer up to date, making sure that all their feedback's coming through. They're kind of the air traffic controller of the entire thing. Yeah. And then on the clients, or on the consultancy side, if you will, there can be any number of different roles involved, but typically there's a user experience professional who is worrying about the wireframes and the personas. Yeah. And then there's visual designer, and there's 100 different names for graphic artists, visual designers,
experience
creative.
Design,
experience design kind of rolls all that together. And then, there's, depending on the breadth and the scope of the individual project, you could have content folks, right, that are focused on the actual content in terms of tone of voice, how to create content, how to assess the current content that's there. And that's anything from, press releases, news articles, things like that.
Yeah.
But then also just kind of how are you conveying the message to those customers, right? And where are those spots where you're going to see some more conversions, and how can we put the right content in the right places? And then, of course, there's, the entire development side. And, I'm staying a little high level here.
Yeah, really definitely high level.
But,
yep.
Then you have your, different levels of development that you need in order to implement, depending on what that system is. And if we go back to our what I keep calling in my head anyway, the conversation, redesign, replatform, rebuild. If you're using the existing platform and you're just kind of doing a visual design, user flow redesign, then you're going to have specific types of people that already know that platform typically. And if you're kind of doing that rebuild or replatform perspective, then you're going to bring in developers, especially that know that new platform. Mm-hmm. And then there's things like content migration and all sorts of other things that we could
talk about this forever.
It's a podcast on its own, but yeah.
So, and this is another hashtag it depends question, but in your experience, what sorts of challenges have come about that you've seen through the entire redesign process? Like, are there a few that kind of just stick out in your mind? You're like, yeah, these are more bound to happen than some other challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 or 3 kind of big ones. So the first would be the old kind of too many cooks in the kitchen. So you have too many people with too many opinions that are looking for what they want specifically and not as concerned about sort of what the customer needs. So if you have a strong team of user experience people that can really push that narrative of, and what I always tell all my clients is the reason we do personas, and there's numerous of them, but what I love doing is putting up the personas after they've kind of all been locked in and everybody's agreed. You put them up on a wall, and any design decision or any decision you make moving forward, if it doesn't fit for one of those people, then we should not be doing it. Sometimes you're going to have to, but it's a nice kind of guide pole to kind of keep everyone in line in a little bit, to try to keep as many cooks out of the kitchen as you can. The second one would probably be the old scope creep concept, right? Of, as you're in the middle of doing a redesign or doing any of this work, oh, well, now we need to be able to do this, right? And whatever this is can get expensive and costly and mess things up that have already been done. And so that's why one of the things that we do up front, one of the roles that I didn't mention before is like a business analyst to really kind of define all the requirements, create that backlog for the development team so everyone can check off all the boxes. Here's what we are building, here's why, and you go through that entire list. Pretty much, I don't know ever a project that I've ever been on that doesn't have some level of scope creep, because there's always, we forgot about this, right? There's this other system that we use that we have to integrate with. Okay, now we'll figure that out.
Well, there's such like large processes and time consuming, and there's so much involved that it makes sense that some things would kind of like fly under the cracks, and that's what that business analyst is there to do, and tell you, oh guys, we totally forgot that we need to do this thing. Because I know that happens to me just on a daily basis of things that I forget to do. So
that's why there's a million to-do apps out there, right? And track your list of stuff to do. But no, and oftentimes it comes from the client where they're, that the 2 different flavors of scope creep are, we forgot about this system. We never told you about it. So, but now we have to account for it. And the other is, something like, the CEO says we need to be able to do this, and you have to figure out how to do it. Sorry.
Yeah.
So there's conversations that we have along that and try to figure that out. But
so recently, it's all the talk that there's a massive shift to just a mobile first mentality. Everybody has a cell phone. We know that that's never going to change. So where does mobile and this mobile first mentality fit in with website redesign?
I don't ever use that phrase anymore, because mobile is just part of the experience. There was the mobile first shift was really meant because 8-ish years ago, people would go through a redesign exercise and they wouldn't consider mobile at all, right? And here's your new desktop platform, and you look at it on your phone and it looks like garbage, right? So that was really the shift towards, hey, you guys need to be thinking about this while you do this work. Those days are kind of gone now, in that everything is responsive across devices. So,
cool.
So you're
Okay.
you still have to build it in that way, but it's not an afterthought anymore. It's part of the process. It's making sure that you design for those breakpoints so that you are able to adjust for any different device, because we're also getting to a place now where the devices really aren't getting any smaller right now.
Yeah.
They might. It's
the
definitely
iPhone
possible.
13 is this big.
Yeah, it's a monster. But tablet usage has grown tremendously.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, probably 3-4 years ago, you would see, oh, the desktop looks fine there. Mm-hmm. But actually it doesn't, right? Because that's a new breakpoint, especially for some of the larger iPads. You can do a lot of good stuff in there, scaled down a little bit from a desktop view. I don't anticipate desktop really ever going anywhere necessarily.
Yeah.
But those numbers will continue to shift more towards mobile. So it's less about mobile first than it is about device. Like it's all part of the design process now. And oftentimes we will still kind of design at that desktop level first, for right or for wrong, but we'll do that first because it's a lot easier to convey what we're trying to get across to different clients when you can see it full, right? Instead of it
on a
sitting
smaller
on
screen,
Now that said, oftentimes you will want to lead with showing clients mobile first, right? Like you'll want to show it to them and say, okay, everything's in here, trust me.
Yeah.
And watch, hit this hamburger menu, whatever, and you'll see all the stuff in there. But from a desktop perspective, it helps clients understand sort of the rationale and the thinking behind where you're trying to get to with that design.
I was reading an article the other day, a blog post that HubSpot had sent over, and it was something like 3 in 5 people first access a website via their mobile device. So
that seems
just,
right.
It just makes sense, and it's crazy to think that it's because mobile first is kind of like a buzzword, and it still is, and I think it will be for a little while until mainly marketers kind of hop on that train of okay, it's not just a mobile first mentality anymore. It's like plus mobile,
Right. Well, and it's you've actually seen quite a bit of that, and even if you think about there was the sort of Alexa, Google, whatever that Google Voice or not Voice, Google whatever it's called. The different voice assistants, essentially, right? Like, so about 3-4 years ago, all the advertisements that you saw on TV during the Super Bowl, they were playing off of that, right? Not all of them, but they were kind of playing with that, and they would say things like, Alexa, do this, and then all of a sudden your Alexa would start playing whatever their brand is. So it really is, if you think about it, I think you're right, because the divide was always, and this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, give or take, where mobile overtook desktop. I don't think it's ever going to go back, because if you think about if you're sitting on your couch and you're watching some show and a commercial comes on, it's like, oh, what's that website? Oh, boom, you're going to pull out your phone.
We all have our phone right next to us.
It's either in your hand or it's next to you, right? You're not going to get up and go up into your office and start typing things in, right? So that's just going to continue to evolve. There's a lot of, and this is definitely a topic for another podcast, but all the AR, VR stuff that's happening now, the phone is kind of going to go away a little bit too, right? Because you're just going to be immersed in these experiences. You're going to be able to do things through your TV, things like that. It's exciting. It's just, it's another thing to think about from a marketing perspective, though, as we go forward, and keep your eye on it.
Definitely. So just going back to the redesign, rebuild kind of stuff, where does digital marketing fall into this? Digital marketing is a huge thing. It's a big thing, that we even do here at our company. So where does it fall within the redesign realm?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a critical part, and we haven't mentioned it yet, but it really is. It's weird because it's another arm of the same concept, right?
Yeah.
So as part of that discovery phase that I was talking about, you really want to get in and look at what your digital marketing is today, right? Because you need to think about all the things that we've been talking about this entire episode is getting people into your site, getting them through, converting them, gaining the leads, all that. The leads part of it is through digital marketing. Yeah. So how well are you doing that? Is it successful? Can you increase that? Is there better things that you can do? And that feeds that funnel. But when you feed that funnel, that has to tie into the design that you're looking at on the site, right? Mm-hmm. So great social media presence, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What happens when they get to the site?
Yeah.
So getting a whole bunch of people to click on that link inside that social media post is a wonderful thing. But then they get to your site and they go meh, and they close it and go away. It's not successful in any way. So doing that, and then really looking at all the different email marketing and all the different channels that are out there. I mean, ultimately in a redesign process, we want to think omnichannel anyway.
Omnichannel is a huge, I don't even want to call it a trend now, because it's no longer it's no longer a trend, but it's something that if you want to stay, in line with the competition, then you have to be optimized for omnichannel marketing.
Right. Well, it's omnichannel marketing and omnichannel experiences, right? And it's being able to, and it really does boil back down to that customer experience. The old days, and I have a couple clients that still think like this, like I have a message, I want to send it, I want people to get it. Mm-hmm. Well, if they're not, regardless of whether they're getting it or not, is it the message that they want to hear?
Yeah.
So really putting that customer, that user first, and you mentioned this earlier, putting that user first in the entire experience across all of the touch points of your brand is what's important. Targeting millennials on Facebook, not a great idea. They're not there. Yeah. And if they are, they probably don't care about your brand, right? Probably. But that's what the analytics and that's what your digital marketing team will help you understand and figure out, because sometimes they are there, and maybe that's a really nice avenue for you to go down. Probably not, but it could be. But so to answer the long story short of your question is, digital marketing needs to be involved from the beginning. And whether that's, with an agency or in-house or whatever it is, but looking at it and, I'll go back to, I think I made this comment earlier about always monitoring your stuff.
Yeah.
So your website, your marketing campaigns, all of your digital marketing touch points, those should always constantly be monitored. Where can you improve them? Where are you falling down? And again, what are your competitors doing? And can you take advantage of some of that? It's really kind of all part of the same story.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's all just like one big puzzle kind of just seeing how all the pieces are going to fit together.
Right.
And then using A/B testing to figure out if all the pieces are working.
You go. Right. And constantly optimizing. Right. And always, and you make a great point of at the end, yes, A/B testing, continue to evaluate different options, right? A versus B over time. But also, because you've got your analytics going and you're seeing what's working and what isn't, you should constantly be adjusting your site. You should constantly be making improvements where you see opportunities for improvement. Because once if you launch a brand new website, hey, we did it, we redesigned it, and then you just let it sit there, it's, just like back to the house, right? It's just going to start to wear down and degrade over time. You have to keep it fresh, keep things updated, constant content updates, constant involvement from your marketing team, your development team, testing, checking, think of it as a living, breathing thing that has to be maintained over time.
Yeah, and that kind of just goes back to what you were talking about in the beginning when we were talking about how do you know when it's time, and you're like, okay, well, if it's been 5 years, then you should probably start to think about a redesign. But it's like like you said, you have to be doing this on a consistent basis, and you haven't updated something in 2 years. How do you know that just because it's been 2 years, that doesn't mean it's already outdated? Technology in this industry moves so quickly that it's extremely important to be consistently evaluating and reassessing everything.
Yep. And 5 years is probably too long.
Yeah.
Frankly. I mean, because you're absolutely right. I mean, if you are constantly monitoring and, keeping your site fresh and content fresh, then after 5 years, take a look and kind of take a step back and reassess and reevaluate. If you're not doing those things, it's 2 years, a year, 2 years, right? Like because you're not maintaining it, it needs to be refreshed, if you will, back to our re-conversation. So I mean, the actual number of years, not as relevant as the health and status of your marketing communications through your brand, through your website, through your social touch points, through all of your omnichannel touch points.
Yep. So this is another hashtag it depends question. I promise the last one of the session, but are there a few important goals that companies should keep in mind for themselves, while they're going through the process or while they're, getting started for the process?
The process of
website redesign.
Of doing a redesign.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the goals in general, I think we've covered some of them, but you're going to have business goals and objectives, right? If you're going through a redesign effort, clearly something has shifted in your organization, right? So it's, could be we have a rebranding effort. we have, new products and opportunities that we want to showcase. Whatever. There's 100 different reasons for that. But the goals and objectives at the end of the day are typically to sell more stuff, to get more leads, to get more conversions, all of those things. What I would say is that the number one goal of all of that goes back to our customer experience conversation. Putting that customer at the front of all of those decisions is what leads to success. Yeah. Not doing that, you could have the best goals in the world, but if no one's there to hear your message or, interact with your brand or buy your stuff, then you failed already.
Yeah, and then it's going to be, going through all of this for essentially nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, right, to make yourself feel better because you have a brand new shiny website. Great, cool, good for you. But if no one's there to buy your stuff, what would you do it for?
My very last question for you for this podcast today is just, do you have any advice for those who are thinking about redesigning their websites, but they're just not really sure where to start or how to kind of like pull the trigger?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think much like everything else in my life, Google is a great resource, number one. I wouldn't be able to do half of the things I do today without Google.
Same.
Thank you very much.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Google.
I don't know how we used encyclopedias back in the day, but because Google's pretty phenomenal. But no, there's a lot of different ways to, and there's a million sites out there that'll tell you when it's time to redesign, why you should, why you shouldn't, all that kind of stuff. So, do your research. But the bigger advice I would give is, go do that first, but then have a conversation with someone who's been down this path before. Because there's lots of little trip ups and things that you want to avoid along the way. And sometimes to our kind of redesign versus replatform versus rebuild, sometimes you don't need to redo everything, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's a few adjustments that you can make to some graphics, some content, to some of the flows and the paths through a system that will accomplish all of those goals and objectives that you were just asking about, right? If I have these certain goals and objectives and I can do a couple of small things for minimal cost, great. And then you're going to win. You don't always have to, throw the baby out with the bathwater just because you want a new website, right? So there's lots of different ways, but I would say have that conversation with, an agency, I don't know, like AmericanEagle.com or anyone else.
AmericanEagle.com plug.
Just a small plug. But no, really, I mean, there's numerous organizations out there that have done this time and again, and all of them are happy to have a conversation, a 10, 15-minute conversation to help you get your head around what you might need and what you might not.
Yeah, and I like that advice too, and I think it's very helpful because, like you said, it doesn't always have to be the big bang. Mm-hmm. You can just start with analyzing a few small things and seeing, where that takes you, and I think then the entire process is a lot less daunting.
Yep.
Because it seems like it would be a big, undertaking.
Yeah, and that's, to go back to that discovery part of the process that we were talking about. I mean, so the conversation with someone for 15 minutes is like the pre-discovery process, but then, for a minimal investment, you can get a team of experts to come in and really look at what's going on and get under the hood and figure out, what needs to change, what can stay, what's working, what isn't. And that gives you a great path forward to decide, both from a time and a budget perspective, is this something we really want to do? Mm-hmm. Is it worth it? What's the ROI at the end of it? Are we going to see that increase in leads, increase in revenue? Because if so, then maybe the investment's worth it. If it's not, then it's not. And you've only invested a small amount of money instead of going through the whole thing. Right. And, here's hundreds of millions of dollars. Go do this for us, and then you come out the other end and you don't know what you have. So have the conversation. Anyone is more than willing to have that conversation and help you understand what you need.
Well, awesome. That was, all the questions that I had for you today. Okay, we've talked for almost an hour now, which is good for us. So
solid.
Thank you so much for being here today with us, Mike. I hope this episode, gave some of our listeners some insight into just the process of a website redesign and everything that they will need to know. And we appreciate you. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Taylor, for having me on. This has been fun.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Modern Marketing Messages. For more information about the topics discussed today, check out the description of this episode. If you like this episode, follow this podcast wherever you listen to them to stay up to date with us. While you're at it, give us a rating and share this podcast with others. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Modern Marketing Messages. This episode is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. I'm Taylor Card, and I'll be back with another Modern Marketing Message.